Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of OneTAKE Live, where we discuss the future of work, life, and culture with visionaries, entrepreneurs, game changers, academics, and generally visionaries in our space. I am your host, Ian Barkin. So great to be here with you. You know the drill, some housekeeping tips. Please, if you've joined us, let us know that you've joined us. Put your name in the comment field on your LinkedIn or Twitter field post. Chat section. Do share where you're joining us from, and be ready to share questions. We love taking questions from the audience and love answering them. And even if we don't have time to get to them on the show, we will absolutely aspire to get to them after the show. So there you have it. Thanks again for joining us. So OneTAKE has been on for about 61 episodes so far, 61 shows. And so it is exciting that we've gone long enough, we've survived long enough to actually have some great guests back again, to have them not only once, but twice. And my next guest is exactly that. So I'll do some more intro in a moment, but I want to first welcome him onto the show. Peter High, welcome back to OneTAKE Live.
Ian, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for including me again. It was fun last time. So fun, in fact, that I was jumping at the chance to do it again. So thank you.
And me too. Thank you so much. So when you were with us, we covered your background, we covered the work you do. If anybody wants to know more about Peter High, go do your homework by checking out the other OneTAKE Live where he was a guest. But the nutshell summary is you are the founder and CEO of Metis Strategy. You are a prolific host of a podcast that talks about innovation technology. It's called Technovation. And you really did hone your craft in working with, I actually, as I was thinking about preparing for the show, I was thinking about it. You've effectively throughout your career, you've Gretzky'd, if you will. You were skating to where the puck was going and where it has gotten to, which is you advise the world's CIOs and CTOs and CDOs, but the CIO community knows you and you know them, and you've worked with them closely for decades now to understand the role that technology effectively can play in small and ultimately massive strategic ways. Let's start there. Just what's it been like to have successfully Gretzky'd and found yourself where you are, speaking to the people that you speak to today?
Well, very kind of you to say that, Ian. And I am a hockey fan, so I know not only do I know that oft used but fantastic line of his, but I wish I could say I was prescient enough to have Gretzky to know where the puck was going at all these times. I had the good fortune of working for a couple of firms before founding my own, one of which, of course, you and I were colleagues at, I'm delighted to say. That's how you and I originally know each other.
Right.
And I had the good fortune of learning what a CIO was. I certainly didn't know that in the early, until I joined a firm that served them, and have had the good fortune through the years of advising a group, a persona, a role within so many different organizations that is rising in strategic importance. And so I suppose I can take some credit in founding my own firm of having a laser focus on the people who run technology and digital, mostly at big organizations, right, and knowing enough about what good looks like for first and foremost, from having seen some great examples of what good looks like and what world-class looks like early in my career, and to advise others who aspire to do the same and to climb the rungs towards better levels of performance, to model their own actions after those people who'd sort of tread the path initially towards that world-class level of performance as well. So I feel very grateful that this is the community that I'm a part of and the ecosystem that my colleagues and I have built.
Perfect. Okay, so there's the background. For anyone who didn't know Peter High, you now know enough about him for us to have an outstanding discussion, because not only are you a prolific podcast host, you are also now a prolific author. And you've written 2 books before the one we're going to talk about today, and they were decidedly technology oriented just because, by virtue of just the titles. So I will read them at you as just to prove that I dug them up again. But so Implementing World-Class IT Strategy and World-Class IT When Businesses Succeed, or Why Businesses Succeed When IT Triumphs. So very IT oriented. Mm-hmm. this most recent book that is available on Amazon, although not quite yet out, I believe. So go in, put your early orders. Is that a fair statement, Peter?
Comes out tomorrow.
Comes out tomorrow.
But available on Kindle already.
Perfect. So I suggest everybody listening, everybody who will tune in later, absolutely check this book out. Go to Amazon or go to Metis Strategy, your website, to find it. It's not a deviation, but it's almost an aperture opening, right? Because you were talking about IT and IT. This one is now a broader scope. You're talking about, and the title is Getting to Nimble. Subtitle being How to Transform Your Company into a Digital Leader. So I don't see the word IT or technology in there at all. So you've gone broader. So talk us through who this book is for.
Yeah, so I mean, it certainly does still apply to CIOs, chief digital officers, chief technology officers, as people who I think lead functions that will determine the nimbleness of organizations or not. But you're right, Ian, as this conversation has expanded, and as frankly all parts of the organization have profound implications in terms of where digital transformation may draw value, and especially, during the crisis of the past year, this has been underscored all the more. As one thinks about where innovation is derived within almost any company, it's really the intersection between technology and all the other disciplines of the organization. That could be the product and service areas, of course, but also the operations, human resources, the various business units and functional areas of the organization. And so I would say that anyone who is immersed in these topics, whether they lead them or they are co-leads to these, or frankly, simply influencing them, I would think that they are potentially, I hope anyway, that they are potential readers of this book.
That's great. And we got there towards the end of our last discussion. We were effectively talking about the dynamics of the era that we're in. We're forcing everybody to be more flexible, more agile, to change more quickly. And so you had teased the concept that this book was coming and that you were going to be looking at this concept of nimbleness. So let's move on to that. Let's unpick that word for a moment. What do you mean by nimble in the context of this book and the story that you tell?
Yeah, well, so with the pace of change, I think without argument being faster than it has ever been, and the pace of innovation the same, it requires that we build organizations that can seize opportunity as it presents itself and stave off issues as they present themselves, because each of those will be appearing more rapidly than in the past. And an inability to pivot quickly in both of those directions towards the opportunity away from the issues can have existential issues associated with those. I profile a number of companies that were once not just good players, but world-class performers in their industries that are no longer, and some of the diagnosis as to why. But also a number of organizations that have gone through radical transformations to set up these nimble organizations who can do that. The whole title actually comes from a conversation with the chief information and technology officer of CarMax, a guy named Shamim Mohammed. And I think it's really emblematic of what I'm talking about here. I asked him, as I often do, interviewees of my podcast, present company included, what are some of the trends that excite you as you look to the future? And as many do, he offered up a couple, as I recall, blockchain and I believe machine learning were two of them that he thought had the application for CarMax. But he concluded his remarks by saying, if I'm looking out 3 years, let's say, the number one trend that will mean most for my company may be something you and I can't even name right now, such as the pace of change. And so I need to set up an organization that is nimble, and thus the concept that I described a moment ago.
Which is great. And it's why you were the right person to write the book in the first place, is because throughout it, you actually refer to all of these great discussions, these one-on-one discussions you've had with visionary leaders that have transformed enterprises that are archetypes and success cases that we know, and active leaders today. I got to go back and see what I said about what I look forward to in the future. It was probably flying cars and quadruple stuff Oreos. So
sounds good to me.
They just keep adding. It's like the Gillette razors. They just keep adding one. So nimble is effectively enterprise Darwinism. It's the fight or flight. It's the ability to run from, or in a good way, from challenges and adapt to the environment that's changing so quickly for us. So you've gone about putting together more of a guidebook. I think even in your own words, you say towards the end of the book, this is a guidebook for enterprises. Certainly speaks to the individuals in the audience that you know so well, the CIOs and technology leaders and organizations, but it's much broader than that. And I mean, I related to it on multiple levels because you really do touch on sort of the age-old and reliable people process technology triptych, which is an oldie but a very goodie. And then you also add some other elements. Let's start at the beginning. Let's start with the people one for a moment. So you really do hone in on enterprises that want to change or need to change and react to the imperative of being nimble. Focus on people. And there's actually a great story that you tell, a tasty example, if you will, of Frito-Lay. And maybe you can expand on that. What's the role that enterprises need to, or the focus that they need to put on people?
Yeah. So beginning with the story of Frito-Lay, I begin the introduction with the story of Charlie Feld, who is he's now in his 70s. He wouldn't mind my saying. And it seems like at the crossroads where all the changes have happened over the course of the past 50 years or so in technology. First as a influencer at IBM, then as one of the first ever chief information officers at Frito-Lay. He would go on to be a leader in multiple places, and then eventually a CIO for hire, a technologist for hire at a cadre of Fortune 500 organizations. And I'm very proud to call him a friend. And he has told me this story of Frito-Lay's transformation digitally, and what was so interesting about it is how much rhymes. This is a story of the early 80s, and it talks about how the dynamics of retail were changing. For instance, obviously this is a CPG company and their products sold through at the time, at least, and continuing in some cases, which is at the time like an A&P, which doesn't exist. One of those examples of a once great company that doesn't exist anymore, to the Krogers or the Walmarts, certainly that do, and talks to how the dynamics of regional players like a Kroger or an A&P changed to the big box format with a Walmart that had not only a national footprint, but a lot more pricing power, and the need to leverage technology to help them, for instance, with pricing initially, and then expanding into the way in which the organization thought even about putting technology in the hands of the distributors of the chips to be able to gather information from customers when they were in direct contact with them. Right. So anyway, what's so interesting is there's a lot of parallels between the changes there and what's happening today. And so I go on to tell a bit of that story. But to your initial point of the reason to start with people and the importance of people is ultimately, despite the fact that so much of what we talk about with regard to fostering nimbleness focuses on some of the processes and technology, for example, that we leverage, and we'll get into as you point out some of the additional themes that I add. Without great people doing the right jobs at the right time, without having kind of a learning agility to that team, such that they are constantly trying to accrue, pushing to accrue, I should say, to get the skills of the future as opposed to resting on the laurels of skills of the present or past. Then you can have the best processes, the best technology, and you're not going to be able to do much with them. And so ensuring that you've got a nimble culture, frankly, becomes that much more important. I tell the story in the book of Ben Fried, the longtime chief information officer of Google. And he and I were at a conference not a while back. We were on stage together, and in preparation, the lead up to that, I asked him, as Google has become a behemoth during your tenure, he's been there probably a dozen years now. How have you maintained this entrepreneurial spirit and this ability to continue to pivot towards opportunity? And he said that we've always made sure that change is itself a core competence within our organization. Right. And what a great way to frame that it's the one constant that all of us can guarantee, essentially. And yet it's not a normal thing for us as humans to embrace change. We get into our routines and we that those routines become comfortable, and we may actually actively push against the change that's exerted upon us. And so if we can just ensure that we have teams that are comfortable with change, and even at the end of the day push for it where that's appropriate, then we're a long way towards developing those cultural attributes that will enable that greater degree of nimbleness.
Great point. And we'll come back to that, because I do want to touch on change and your conclusions and final recommendations and how they live within that, as you say, the sort of substrate reality of change resistance that's so often found in large, especially large successful enterprises. Don't want to leave Frito-Lay yet, again, because it's so tasty and because it's so relevant. There's a great sort of simplification and point that's made in the book, where it was an individual at Frito-Lay who effectively had said, our business is pretty straightforward and simple. We buy potatoes and we turn them into a product, and the rest is really it isn't as core, right? And so we need to focus on that. And it reminded me of the fundamentals, like people, like process, like technology, that always are the fundamentals and the foundation and the core of any transformation that goes on. But then there also another Frito-Lay story sort of reminded me that things have changed quite a bit. I mean, the efforts that were made to introduce executives to technology by installing personal computers in their homes was visionary at the time. I wonder if it's as easy now. It would be harder, I imagine, to install blockchain in someone's home or machine learning or deep learning into an executive's home to upscale the leadership to understand the mechanics and the mechanisms of today.
Yeah.
And to make the question even longer, it made me think of what both you and I have done as far as putting together LinkedIn learning courses and all the teaching that you do. Is there are some enterprises I see who are using the mechanisms that are available to us today, which are massively open MOOCs, open courseware, or LinkedIn Learning or Udacity or others, to try to upskill people. Is that going to be enough? Is there a comparable to personal computers in the executive's home that will upskill leadership fast enough for the nimbleness that enterprises need today?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ian. You're right. Some of the topics may seem more esoteric today that need to become the areas of expertise, or at least knowledge and understanding of the broader enterprise. Now, what I would say is the advantage that a technologist or a digital leader has today is an executive across the organization. In fact, the workers, the employees across any major organization now have such a greater appreciation for technology because of this little beauty. One doesn't need an engineering degree or a computer science degree to recognize that technology is elemental, that it is fundamental to what we are doing as in our personal lives, in addition to our business lives. Right. And so there's a degree of understanding and curiosity relative to the topic, generally speaking, that certainly did not exist in the 1980s. You could certainly be, in fact, I would guess that the majority of CEOs, didn't have any kind of technology to speak of, at least in its what we would recognize to be sort of more modern technology of the time, on their desks. And that was perfectly fine. They could be, very successful, never having a computer on their desk. Right. And obviously that's no longer the case. So I think there is really a necessity for those people who are the digital and technology leaders within organizations to be the teachers, to go to your point of the MOOCs and the teaching and the ways in which you and I have done some influencing in those very areas. I think that these technology and digital leaders need to be the ones who express and explain the art of the possible to the rest of the organization. Right. And the fact that the rest of the organization is at a higher plane of understanding than they would have been in decades past is an advantage they need to take. That is an advantage they need to seize, because I think that is really an important aspect to this, to say the least. And so I think it does really require that you have a curriculum of your own creation in many cases, while also providing them with an understanding. Okay, you may not know what blockchain or machine learning is or artificial intelligence is. Let me show you some applications. Let me show you, in fact, some of the things we are working on that apply to the ways in which we as a business do business, so that it's more clearly understood. If you'll indulge me just for a brief moment longer, Ian, the chief digital officer of Mars So another CPG, another delicious example here for you.
Thank you.
Sandeep Dadlani is his name. And he decided, look, artificial intelligence, for example, is going to be, the trend that we are going to be riding for quite some time. And we need to become experts in this. He developed a curriculum internally and began the process of implementing it among his digital team, and mistakenly sent a link out to the broader organization with some of this curriculum and found that thousands of people were taking this course. Again, at a CPG organization, not a tech organization.
Right.
Such was the curiosity with regard to the topic. So I think a lot of leaders will find there is this appetite out there to learn more as to what these buzzwords, what these trends actually mean and their application back to our own enterprises. And this, again, is that opportunity that should be seized.
I couldn't agree more, and I've done it within Sykes as well. I've emulated the LinkedIn Learning example that I saw and applied it. And you also, what's so powerful again is this isn't an example. This isn't esoteric. You also cite an example of the CIO of Washington Post, who puts together a curriculum and effectively, no questions asked, says take whatever technology course you're interested in, because it was upskilling. And I saw that as well. It was, it blew my mind, but about a year ago, a lot of people were liking my LinkedIn Learning course, and they all worked at the same African bank. And so it happened enough times that I woke up to and paid attention to what was happening, and I got in touch with them to ask. And it was exactly that same situation where the bank had just made this commitment and told everybody, here's a curriculum. Just so happened that I would imagine that both your and my courses were on that curriculum, and they were watching it. And whether they be a frontline teller or an IT professional, they were upskilling, and they were becoming more adept at those modern capabilities that they would need. And I loved your story about Washington Post, because it's one of those traditionally, or it's a more traditional business, but one that had a survival imperative placed upon it that they needed to pivot. And in some small part, they did it by educating people about modern capabilities.
Indeed.
So let's pivot there. So many different places we could go, but one of them I would be remiss if we didn't touch on. Actually, before I will do live stream housekeeping, which is welcome the people who did share their names with us on the live stream so far. So David Reichman, hello. Peter Skagen, hello. Mary Michael Dukin from San Francisco, thanks for joining us. Nestor Noriega from Colombia, hello, Nestor. So great to have you. If you haven't shared your name, please put it in. Please get your questions ready. Okay, back to the regular programming. You describe, Peter, this pivot from a company being sort of a project company to a product company and having product company thinking. Expand on what product company thinking is.
Yeah, and in some ways, actually, the Washington Post is an ideal example of this again, in fact, Ian. So what we are seeing is a major trend, which really emerged maybe 6 years ago or so, is when I started to hear more about some really A-plus technology leaders that were starting to orient their teams around this. Although I don't know the origin story definitively. For me, the first person, and I'll get to the Washington Post, a brief digression first, Atticus Tyson, the chief information officer, he now also runs security for Intuit, but was the CIO at the time, and a product leader prior to that, brought this product orientation to Intuit's IT division. Mm-hmm. And the idea is, just like the products that we are selling to our customers, we should be thinking about what are the services, what are the business capabilities that our organization has as writ large, that we can continue to innovate around, that we can build cross-functional teams to manage, and really take sort of a bigger and broader and a longer view on innovation relative to some of these most important capabilities of the organization. Right. And take really sort of that mentality that we would normally have towards products, again, in the traditional sense for the organization, and bring that back into how we run things from an IT perspective. It means, for example, having budgets that are perpetual as opposed to annual. It means, as I mentioned a moment ago, cross-functional resources that are assigned to this, which draws a lot of richness from across the organization in terms of that ongoing ideation. It also means a lot less throwing over the fence from the development of projects to the operations of those projects or initiatives, which is always a better way to manage these products as well. And so let me just briefly tell the story of the Washington Post. You teed it up in another area that I talked about them in the book as well. But Shailesh Prakash, I spoke to him just a couple of hours ago. Yeah, for about 10 years, 11 years now, has been the chief information officer of the Washington Post. Joined an organization that was in a difficult space. I mean, the industry has been going through such a difficult time for so long, and saw in the Washington Post a real diamond in the rough. Of course, an international paper that happens to be based where I'm joining you from today in DC, but one that was languishing from an advertising revenue was going down, ceded largely to companies like Facebook and Google. Readership was going down, and as a result of that, with the issues with budgets, the talent of the organization, the columnists, the reporters, their funding for different international bureaus, for instance, was decreasing, and they were having to close some of those as well. And so he saw the opportunity through digital transformation to rethink from a product perspective how in fact things were done. And so I'll give you, there's several layers to this, but let me just give you one of the most dramatic of these. As he was underscoring, or as he rather was investigating, where could my team in IT have the biggest impact across this organization, as he worked with the rest of the company on some of the pain points and opportunities, he discovered that the publishing platform, which is really in many ways the lifeblood, the central nervous system of how the paper, the organization got its news stories and opinions out to readers. And naturally in the news game where minutes matter, any kind of kludginess or issues with that could actually be really problematic in a fundamental way.
Right.
So he redesigned it. He developed a product team around the platform itself and redesigned it from the ground up and developed something that leapfrogged the industry to such a dramatic extent that he recognized the opportunity to take this internal product that assembled things in the ways I described a moment ago and actually productized it outside as well. He initially did a test gratis with some university newspapers just to develop some conclusions as to its efficacy for properties outside of the Washington Post's fold, and then took it to market and began to sell this. More broadly speaking, it's now a $100 million business for the Washington Post. Right. And by the way, he went from CIO to now CIO and Chief Product Officer for the company. And as you know, probably Jeff Bezos personally purchased the Post, and he's now a consigliere to Bezos and on the board of Blue Origin as a result of his great work in that Post. So really, it's having this orientation. Not everyone, of course, will have the stair steps towards remarkable success that Shailesh has. That I've just described. But I think having this orientation can have some really powerful consequences for one's enterprise.
Right. Totally agree. And what I like in addition about that story is actually the prequel, which is that Donald Graham, who was the CEO of Washington Post before Jeff Bezos bought it, he had the vision to integrate the print and the digital businesses, which created that sort of seamless bridge, which probably set up to have those epiphanies and realizations of what could be done that ultimately was productized. Which, and I said I'd get there at the end, but I'll bring it in now because you talk about moments of truth around change.
Yes.
And so, a CIO who's brought in and has been in other companies, they sort of bring with them both the right to and the mindset around change. But somebody, in this case, Donald Graham, who'd been at that company for, I believe, his whole life, he's the one who recognized the need for change. And that was probably more impressive to me, that he was willing to take that step, and seems so imperative for any large successful enterprise to have leadership that's willing to have that moment of truth, understand that change is happening and that they need to evolve. Otherwise, they won't be around to try to evolve.
That's exactly right. So many people, when they hear the initial parts of the story with the Washington Post, almost immediately go to the conclusion that this must be because of Bezos. And it's actually not the case. That in fact, it is the scion of the business that was responsible for a lot of this change. And so you're absolutely correct that it's Don Graham, who, by the way, was a Facebook board member, very technologically astute, and did in fact bring together what had traditionally been parallel, almost like rails of a railroad, parallel organizations within the Post, never crossing over. Yeah. And in fact, did help foster that integration. One could certainly argue, if not for Don, for his leadership, Don Graham's leadership as CEO, the property wouldn't have been attractive to Bezos, because of the transformation would not have been far enough along, but for Graham's leadership and Shailesh Prakash's leadership as well.
Right. And to your product company sort of mentality, that company design brings all of those rails together, because you have these multidisciplinary teams where you don't have that distance and that sort of that parallel sort of separation that in my experience within the digital transformation space was always the cause for fiefdoms and battles, is that IT and business traditionally would feel that each other owned whatever change, whatever implementation was necessary, and didn't integrate as much, and therefore weren't laying strong foundations for sustainable change for an enterprise. It was just setting up for the next sort of turf war further down the pike. So.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have a lot of ground to cover and not a lot of time, so I'm gonna sort of go into speed round. So we've covered people, we've glanced past process. Let's move to technology. We've touched on it a lot, but there's two different things that I think are imperative to also highlight. One of them is around the concept of security. You cover it in great detail in the book, and I think that's so very important. Actually, love the comment you made about effectively there are two types of companies in the world, those that have been hacked and those that don't realize that they've been hacked. And so that's become the new and unfortunate normal for enterprises. Is there enough coverage of security? Does there need to be more? Do CIOs understand it? Are they on point to lead this charge for enterprises?
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends on the enterprise. Times they are in fact security reports up through them. As I say, not always. There are some organizations where it's a separate team and perhaps even a peer who's running security rather, because of the importance of this topic. But I would say that among the companies that we're familiar with, among Fortune 500 organizations, it still typically reports through to that head of technology, CIO, CDO, CTO, some combination of those, whatever title they happen to have. And you're right, it's an essential topic. It is an absolutely essential topic that it's critically important that, as it's one of the conundrums that CIOs and technologists face is, as I mentioned, so much innovation is at the intersection of technology and fill in the gap, other discipline from across the entire organization. Innovation is about risk taking, and security is about risk mitigation and management. And getting that balance correct is a tricky dance at times. And it's up to these technology leaders to make sure that they are not turning off innovation, they're not the no in innovation, such that the faucet is completely shut down. That would certainly be the most secure way to do things in one way. But of course, you're going to be in a perilous situation if in fact you're doing that to your organization. Likewise, it can't be the Wild West, that you're just able to try anything and do so irrespective of the security implications. And so having this in mind is of critical importance, to say the least. I need to get you back for a third appearance because there's so much to cover there. But ultimately, this idea of the citizen developer and enabling desktop automation so that you can digitize all the things that get you down in your day job, it presents a potential for massive exposure. And so, I mean, you went there already, but what I thought and was, as I was reading, was that the emphasis and the importance, the critical importance of security across the board now, because of the impact of cybercrime that has hit everybody, could serve as the excuse to not do anything new. Because we really do need to just sort of batten down the hatches and defend the enterprise. And that's a tough balance to make, of being secure and defending, but having to be nimble and evolving. Otherwise, you win on the safety, you lose on the adaptation to be a leader in your space. Yeah, that's critical importance. Critically important that people bear that in mind and make sure that you're getting that balance correct.
So before I leave tech, I have to, and you mentioned innovation, so I have to bring up this quote because I loved it. I related to it quite a bit. But you say in the book, innovation labs have a tendency to be irrelevant labs. Expand.
Yes, well, there's a lot of organizations that are have developed innovation labs to try to breathe life into the art of the possible. A lot of testing that happens. What happens, especially for a Fortune 500 organization, which really needs to develop, tens of millions of dollars in revenue with new product or opportunities, if not more than that. Mm-hmm. If this is just a series of prototypes that aren't getting to scale, then it's not really moving the needles. It's just sort of a various experiments that aren't really moving the needle for the organization. So the trick really is not only, of course, having this group that perhaps has a task to breathe life into the art of the possible and test a variety of different ideas, writing a variety of trends and validating their translation back into one's enterprise, but always being mindful, how do we scale some of these? And in fact, making scaling those opportunities part of the criteria as to which ones move forward and which ones don't. Because if this is just, a series of small ideas that never are really going to bear tremendous fruit, well, then it's not really worth the time that you're putting into this. So that scaling opportunity, that's getting these ideas to scale, really is a part of the missing ingredient oftentimes in the development of innovation labs.
No, it was so nice to hear you say that. I've sometimes flippantly described innovation labs as one part expensive minimalist furniture and one part crap I could buy with a credit card. In so much as you mostly walk into people's innovation labs and look at their 3D printers and their Oculus Rifts and other things that I also could buy. And it's much broader than that. It is how you take a look at your customer, their needs, the evolution of the market, and segue, and the data that your enterprise creates and that which it can use to inform itself and to continue to evolve and be more relevant. You touch on data and have a great, this is a guidebook. There are great visuals and great toolkits. One of them shows this hierarchy that starts from corporate strategy and works its way down to really the data requirements and the data that an enterprise creates. Talk about data for a moment. How is that considered enough in enterprises today, and how can they evolve to consider it more?
Our data suggests that data and analytics is about the top priority as of maybe June or July of last year, with the period before that being just sort of getting the security right and getting the collaboration technology right of so many companies going into quarantine and a new way of operating. Once things were settled, data and analytics, if in many cases, regained their top or near top position in the priority list of a lot of technology and digital organizations, indeed for the companies more generally speaking as well. Look, for any large organization, data is being collected. Data is there, it is being collected, and is being harnessed to some degree. But what we found in those same studies where we've been asking technology leaders about their priorities, data strategy is still relatively in its nascent stages, we are finding in many organizations. So people understand that we need to collect this data. There's even some cases where they're leveraging it to effective, draw better conclusions and make better decisions more rapidly. But having a broader strategy as to how are we going to be using this data. If you're pulling down petabytes of data or many zettabytes, et cetera, of data on a regular basis, but you don't have a way to understand how are we going to be using this? How will we harness it? How will we do so securely, bearing in mind privacy considerations of those from whom we might be drawing this data and the like, just to name a few of the complicating aspects of this. And you don't have a broader guide, or broader strategy for the organization as to why and how, frankly, you're going to be doing this, then actually, it's sort of a series of experiments without a broader picture in place for organizations to follow.
I'd like to think that we're in a sort of a convergence where technology is evolving, and that I think often about automation, where automation's byproduct is digitization of processes. So you've got better, more reliable data. So you're moving from the concept of big to the actual state of having big data. There aren't enough data scientists in the world. So then you go back to the emphasis on skill development and teaching your people maybe not what a blockchain is, but maybe what a regression analysis is, so that they can apply their process context and customer focus to the data that they have. And then maybe that's what an innovation lab could be, is it's sort of a data playroom where you get to poke and prod and state hypotheses and test them. But it was great to see you highlight data strategy as such an important imperative for a nimble company. Okay, so let's see, I'm gonna move on. Two more I really want to talk about. One of them, which I thought was great, was your emphasis on the ecosystem or ecosystem. And maybe that's my first question. How do you pronounce that? But build on that, because you list a sort of catalog of players that any nimble enterprise should consider and nurture as part of their ecosystem.
Indeed, yes. I happen to say ecosystem for what that's worth, but potato, potato. Let's call the whole thing off. So you're right. Competition, I make the point, as others have before me, that competition is less company to company and more ecosystem to ecosystem. Think about the suppliers in your supply chain. Think about the companies with whom you have joint ventures to bring products and services to life. Think about the outsourced partners that give you contracted labor where that's appropriate, for instance, just to name three prominent examples of that. Well, technology and digital leaders also have a broader ecosystem that they ought to be marshaling. I would say every executive does to a great degree as well. That begins with one's peers. So making sure that you've got a trusted, sort of kitchen cabinet, if you will, of let's say 8, 10, a dozen people who you are close with, who you have a lot of respect for, who you can, be vulnerable with and ask really tough questions of as you're testing hypotheses, as you are contemplating issues that you need to resolve, and so on.
I love the sound of that, because I feel like too often in business, people are not willing to be vulnerable and therefore pretend that they know more than they might, and so they can't scrutinize and learn because they're putting up a wall. So I like that one. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. No, not at all.
A good one.
Secondly, very importantly, are customers. Look, if you're not collaborating with your customers, the people who ultimately provide revenue for your organization, as to adjacent areas to get into, as to, again, testing those very same hypotheses with those with whom you're at least have the greatest trusting relationship, so that you're actually solving their issues, that you are, validating pain points that you can help them resolve, and so on. Again, you are not gleaning nearly as much value out of your ecosystem as you can. Third is venture capitalists. That these are, understanding where smart money is being spent and why, very important, especially when we're talking about the pace of change being as rapid as it is. Getting in early on some of those portfolio companies and maybe making some investments of your own, even at a minimum of just investing in the product and using it, becomes that much more important also.
I really liked your mention of VCs, because that really is their effectively a scout for you, almost a personal shopper, where you've got the right network in the right development areas. Then you get to see what's on the horizon. You yourself say in the book that you're placing bets on some. They may be small. The name of the game in venture is that some of them don't survive, but I think you evolve quite a bit as an organism by being exposed to them, their clock speed, their pace of change, and the technologies that they're using. So it was great to see VC as a component of any enterprise's ecosystem.
Yeah,
so I interrupted again. Keep going.
Not in the least. I appreciate you're validating those points, Ian. The last two are just executive recruiters, who may seem like the obvious one, that they can help you find your next job, but actually where they're not tapped nearly enough is these are experts on organizational change, on skills on the rise, skills that are falling. On frankly why your peers are failing, and avoiding some of those same pitfalls, since of course they're often replacing people who've been asked to leave their jobs. And so tapping those people to a much greater extent becomes that much more important as well. And then the last one are strategic partners, organizations like Sykes, for example, making sure that as you are engaging companies as your strategic partners, presumably because of the wide array of experience that they have, that you are doing so not just as fulfillers of work, of a service, or of a product, but also having them bring the world of their experience to you and helping them kind of sort of leveraging them for the development of new ideas as well. So comprehensively, that's how I define the ecosystem.
That's great. And I liked that breakdown too. I found much of my career has been spent as that sort of external partner, the BPO provider, who actually, in this case, has the frontline privileged interactions with the customer. And so it's almost like a triptych of the enterprise themselves, their customers that they want to hear from and understand. And it's actually because they outsource their contact center, call center work. It's that third party partner that's the one picking up the phones, who's got the data and just the gut feel as far as what's working, what's not, what's creating angst or happiness and joy or delight. And so those, I think, will be really and we run some, but just really valuable sort of, I guess, collaborations and design thinking efforts, given the collective knowledge and the intent of creating better customer experience. Okay, so we're in the home stretch. So you use a word a few different times. First is actually to describe the Bezos Mandate. So the word is mandate, in which he declared to his organization, if you're developing software, it better have an API or be able to be connected to, or you're fired. Was the Bezos Mandate email that was famous, and you cited it. Is mandate the way that much of this change is going to happen in enterprises?
Well, gosh, I mean, if only we all were as prescient as Bezos was, and making sure that everything that they were doing. By the way, this is like 20 years ago that he came up with this mandate that everything was to be externalizable through the use of APIs and so on. Mm-hmm. I will say, look, the best changes are the ones that come from the top. I profiled Capital One and FedEx, two organizations that have been through remarkable transformations and made easier by virtue of the fact that they have world-class A+ technology leaders and a couple of Robs, Carter with FedEx and Alexander with Capital One, but both of them are still founder-led. And boy, that really helps an awful lot as well. Right. And most of us don't have necessarily the luxury of being founder-led. And so, but still having the CEO and his or her buy-in, the board, and making the case appropriately such that you have, because these sorts of transformations are going to be costly at times. They're not going to be, a straight path towards victory. And so having that steadfast leadership behind you with the appropriate case made to them as to why and what the ultimate value will be becomes that much more important.
That's great. The best change comes from the top.
Indeed. So
you say, and I saw it as a very relevant barrier that enterprises face is and I quote, many companies resist the change needed to become nimble because of a flourishing traditional business. And so does it fall upon the Don Grahams of the Washington Post and others to be at the helm of a traditional flourishing business, yet realize it's time to get uncomfortable? It's time to self-reflect. It's time to cash cow cannibalize for the sake of survival.
Yeah, and this really gets back to Clayton Christensen's The Innovator's Dilemma, right? You need to have people that are willing to be their own best competition. Yes. That you are competing with yourself, that you will cannibalize your products and services before others have the chance to do so. Again, this is not the natural state of being. This is not comfortable, a comfortable way of managing necessarily, but boy, it sure is necessary. When you compare 1955, when the average company on the S&P 500 would remain there for 61 years, and today the average tenure is closer to 15. Wow, you really need to make sure that you are the one who is doing the reinvention, that you are pushing your company to compete with itself.
Right. Nimble, not comfortable, but necessary.
There you go. Exactly.
So I'd be remiss if I didn't read some questions that were coming in. David Reichman's shared one. His question for us, and it goes back a bit to some of the technology scope of things, but he says, in the process of tech evangelism, you're always sure to run into the doom and gloomers that worry that we'll start losing our jobs to robots and become obsolete. How do you tend to go about calming those types of fears within an organization, or perhaps keep expectations from getting out of control through the process of digital transformation? Thank you, David, first for the question.
Yep.
So, Peter, what would you say about calming the doom and gloomers?
Yeah, thank you, David, for the question as well. And I would say, look, it's important to take these arguments head on. That yes, there's going to be aspects of automation that can have profound consequences to the roles that people currently play. But the key is to make sure that you are helping your team along, such that if you are introducing technology that does render some processes and therefore some roles obsolete, that you're providing the pathway towards the development of those new skills. Back to that learning agility point that I made earlier on, and the points that you raised so effectively in terms of the necessity for training. And then frankly, there may be some scenarios where people don't wish to be on board for that sort of change, and finding ways to be supportive of them as they find their next opportunities as well. So I think this gets back to the concept of change management, communication, open, honest dialogue with one's company, one's employees, and then creating the pathways for continued growth into other roles, hopefully inside your organization, and where necessary outside of the organization, with as much support as possible.
Great answer. Okay, so I want to wrap up by effectively quoting back to you your summary, because it's so powerful. It culminates everything that you've said that an enterprise needs to have or work on having to be nimble and to ultimately be competitive and succeed. And it is, I paraphrase, but it's effectively, if you're in a position where you've got great people, you've got really solid and flexible processes, you've got good technology that is also secure, and probably cloudified to some degree, and a strong ecosystem, and a solid data strategy, and the ability to structure those moments of truth and make change happen, then you're all set. And so I ask of you, Peter High, who speaks to the world's CIOs and advises all of the leading companies that we've all heard of, what percentage of enterprises could tick off each one of those things and say, we're set and we're in a good place right now?
I would say it's an elite group who are mature and operating at the best level relative to everything you've just said. But it's a larger group that are aspiring to do so, and are getting the metrics in place, the dashboards in place, taking an honest assessment of where they stand, and communicating to their team first and foremost, and to the enterprise more generally speaking, as to this warts and all assessment as to where we stand and what the transformation is going to look like. Right. And so I would say it's a larger group. It's not as many as half, I wouldn't say, of let's say the Fortune 500 companies, but it's a much larger percentage that I'm hoping is going to get well past half. That are going to have the mechanisms in place, leveraging whether it's some of the aspects of my book, or even some of the really remarkable aspects of intelligent automation, your book, among other guideposts that will help them along the way towards the transformation that's necessary.
Perfect. So for the larger population that aspires to be those nimble companies, step one obviously is to check out your book. So we will. There it is. Look, graphics. This is high end. so check out Getting to Nimble, Peter High's new book on how to transform your company into a digital leader. But in addition, and Peter, I'll give you the last word. Once they've read your book, what do you think are the next things those aspiring leaders of tomorrow's nimble companies need to do? And what should they put top on their to-do list, priority list for their enterprise over the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months?
Well, continuing with the answer, the dialogue you and I just had, once you have that warts and all assessment, which was going to be different company to company, of course, create a roadmap as to where the change is going to happen. I suggest 5 major themes and 27 sub-themes in my book. You're not going to be making change in all 27 at once. And some of them may not require it because you're already operating at great levels. But choose the 6, 7, 8 perhaps for the foreseeable future, call it the next year, where you're going to make a commitment for raising the bar in terms of the level of performance to those, and then another 6 to 8 behind that, till you get to an appropriate level of maturity across the entire model, or a model of your own choosing, such that you have a means to definitively say, look, we now are operating at an appropriate level relative to the concepts here, or the concepts of our choosing, that represent what we believe to be the total aspect of work that we as a company are doing, and then continue to measure progress or lack thereof as time goes on, because of course different opportunities and issues are going to arise as time passes, but making sure that you never have blind spots by having this more comprehensive view is really the pathway to sustained success.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Peter, again, for coming back to OneTAKE Live. I look forward to having you as my first three-peat guest. And We'll see how fast you can write your next book. But thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks for the question, David. There's another question we'll address offline. Hope everyone is well. Please do check out Peter Hai's new book and tune into Technovation. He has truly interesting, valuable, and insightful discussions with, as we talked about, the world's leading CIOs. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us on OneTAKE, and hope you're all well. Take care.